So it is our Memorial Day service, and the topic is wage peace. Wage peace. Uh, a little of the idea behind this. I don't know about you, but in a peacenik type of community like this one, Memorial Day is a little bit awkward because you want to simultaneously honor those who have sacrificed themselves for the goals of justice, freedom, and protection. And we also, as Unitarian Universalists, hold up the goal of world community with peace, justice, and equity for all. One of our 7 principles is not supporting outgoing warlike activities. And so there's this simultaneous urge to honor protectors and also end war. I find more and more holidays lately are awkward. Maybe that's just me. Uh, because things in life are so nuanced and rarely is something straightforward. So I thought that perhaps one thing, at least that we would all get on board on with, is the necessity to wage peace. Necessity to wage peace. Being a committed peacenik, we can also still honor those who have worked for the protection of their nations and their loved ones. So we're going to talk about waging peace today. Waging peace is also an interesting idea, also nuanced, awkward, complicated, grows more and more complicated because I think some of us, okay, hippies, ex-hippies, peaceniks in the room, any of y'all? Okay, and not just hippies and ex-hippies, but assorted liberal types have found that our previous notions on pacifism and nonviolent resistance, we have had to change and adapt and mature some of those notions. It may be, for example, like in our proposed 8th UU principle, that we need to work actively to dismantle systems of oppression, rather than the idea that some of us may have had. Maybe you didn't have this idea, but some of us may have had this idea that if we just abide in peace and adopt a policy of non-participation in violence, then somehow that will dismantle the violence. And we have found over the years that that doesn't quite work in the way that we hoped. It was a good try. It was a good try. And I still believe you should set up your demonstration communities and grow your own grains and milk your own goats. And it's a part of the picture. But I don't know about you, but for myself, I think my less nuanced or less mature understandings of how we create peaceful societies, they're growing. They're growing and changing. So recent times, I don't know, I think of the last 5 years, may have been a rude awakening for some current or ex-hippies who didn't realize that there was oppression and hatred just festering under the veneer of civilized society, and that it actively needs a peace campaign waged against it. So how exactly do we balance these different drives, the need to dismantle systems of oppression, to be protective, and at the same time not become the same violence and hatred that we're operating against? Well, perhaps related to this, perhaps it means that we will need to learn to use force protectively. So the first thing I wanted to tell you about in the topic of waging peace is that it's important for us to at least think about and consider that sometimes we have to use force protectively. And this, I think, can help us to honor those who have given of their own lives in the name of protection on Memorial Day. In this spirit, I wanted to tell you about the first Memorial Day. The first Memorial. Do y'all know your Memorial Day history, where it came from? Well, once upon a time, there was Decoration Day. This is the well-known history. Was a Civil War holiday, Decoration Day. But what's interesting is recently some archivist figured out that before the first known Decoration Days, there was an early Decoration Day. Let me look on my little notes here from thehistorychannel.com. And remember, May 1st, 1865, there were a group of Union soldiers who were interred at a racetrack in South Carolina. And unfortunately, due to exposure, due to the conditions in this prisoner of war camp that was set up by the Confederacy, many of these Union soldiers had died, and then when the Confederate troops left, their bodies were simply left there at the racetrack. On May 1st in 1865, the first Decoration Day that isn't largely known about, a crowd of 10,000 people, mostly formerly enslaved people of color, some white missionaries, staged a parade around the racetrack after having removed the bodies and given them a proper burial. They sang songs, which, like the one that we'll hear in just a moment, 3,000 Black school children carried bouquets of flowers and sang John Brown's Body. Members of the famed 54th Massachusetts and other Black Union regiments were in attendance and performed double-time marches. Black ministers recited verses from the Bible. So if the news reports are accurate, the 1865 gathering at the Charleston racetrack would be the earliest Memorial Day celebration, commemoration on record. And I just think this is super cool because when we celebrate Memorial Day, I want to think about soldiers fighting to liberate people from slavery. And I want to think about people who have been emancipated from unjust and inhumane oppression, celebrating that particular type of battle. So I wanted to listen with you to the hymn that they sang together in a bit of a commemoration. And so I'll invite Dave, and then one minor content warning. The first verse references death and decay. So if that will trouble any people online, then just cover your ears. But we'll hear this old song, John Brown's Body, which actually precedes the Battle Hymn of the Republic. It was templates for that song.
John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave. John Brown's body lies a moldering in the grave, but his soul is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His soul is marching on. The stars of heaven are looking kindly down. The stars of heaven are looking kindly down. The stars of heaven are looking kindly down on the grave of old John Brown. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah.
Thank you so much, Dave. Really adds a lot to be able to be taken there with the music. So I wanted to share this because it was news to me. I didn't know the first Decoration Day, the first Memorial Day commemoration was actually a small commemoration of very specific soldiers in the Civil War in South Carolina. So the history of our holiday, of course, then doesn't really become a big thing until the National Monday holiday thing and after World War One and into the later wars that we found ourselves in the US connected to. Memorial Day is actually connected to the practice after World War One of wearing a red poppy, which many other nations will do on Armistice Day in November, which I think turned into our Veterans Day, if I'm not mistaken, and came about through a poem called Flanders Field. You'll hear it in a minute. And so I'd like to read you this poem as well, just to immerse ourselves and attune ourselves to the history of this particular commemoration. So, in Flanders Fields by John McCrae. In Flanders Fields, the poppies blow between the crosses, row on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below, we are the dead. Short days ago we lived, fell down, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Fields. Take up the quarrel with the foe, to you from falling hands we throw the torch, be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Fields. So in all of this, I hear a double call. I hear a call both to honor the work of the protectors, that when oppression is happening, to not just lie about complacently and let it go on. And at the same time, that Battle Hymn of the Republic, which was adapted from John Brown's Body, which was adapted from, what was it, Come All Ye Brothers and Sisters, an original camp hymn by Julia Ward Howe, also, who was the founder of what we've come to know as Mother's Day, which was a celebration of peace. And so the double call I hear is to both not let oppression stand, to stand up, to not let the sacrifices of those who have gone before, the protectors who have gone before, been in vain, and at the same time do all we can to work to end the horrors of war. I think we're mature, nuanced, and complex enough adults that we can hold both of those calls together in our hearts at the same time. If we are to do this, though, we must wage peace. Personally, I haven't quite worked out when is the protective use of force and what about these? There's a lot of complex issues, but the one thing I can come down strongly on is the need to wage peace. In that today, I'd like to offer you 3 principles. If you too would like to take up the call as a peacemonger, I have 3 principles that I want to share with you. The first one is very simple, and these are simple because everything else is so nuanced. We're going to need some principles, simple principles, if we are going to be able to practice. The first is simple. It says to abandon the use of punitive or retributive force. To abandon the use of punitive or retributive force. So I can't tell you personally, I don't have a clean ethical answer about the protective use of force. But I can tell you that the use of punitive and retributive force does nothing to create peace in the world, but only creates further destruction. Now, you personally may not go and yell back at your neighbors, but we also have to ask ourselves if our tax dollars fund weapons campaigns to those who are engaging in punitive and retributive force. We are participants, sometimes unknowingly, in an ancient system of justice that says, if you hurt another after being hurt, somehow you've lessened the amount of hurt in the world. instead of increasing it. That's just bad math. So principle number one, completely divest yourself from the use of punitive or retributive force. While protective force may be necessary, retributive force is not. In this case, an eye for an eye really does make the whole world blind. Our practice of peace may be incomplete if we do not allow for the necessity of protection, but our humanity is incomplete if we feel that vengeance is wholesome or in any way healing. Vengeance neither soothes our inner pain in any real way, nor does it contribute to the vision of a beautiful world we all want to share. I think it's time to retire the belief that hitting back in any way balances the scales. We can work on this principle in our hearts, ferret out the places where emotionally we might still prefer to burn down the shelters of our enemies rather than forge a new peace together. And we can work on this in our activism, perhaps inquiring as to whether our tax dollars support military actions based on this ideal of retribution or deterrence, which is based in the causing of more human suffering. You might want to think in your activism, do your country's immigration campaigns, are they based on a policy of deterrence based on causing suffering to people to get them to do what you want? Causing more suffering does not alleviate suffering in the world. Okay, principle number one, abandon, divest, abolish, smash, destroy. Remove yourself from retribution, vengeance, and the punitive use of force. You can still be an amazing protector. Principle number two, the zero-sum fallacy. Okay, let me look and see. Have you heard of the zero-sum fallacy? Have you heard of the zero-sum fallacy? So this is where you assume there are no win-win situations. You presume a win-lose situation, right? This is called zero-sum thinking. The good news about zero-sum thinking is that it's usually a fallacy. It's usually a fallacy. This is one of the cognitive biases that seems to be written into our genetic code. Somehow it helped our ancestor tribes to survive, to think, oh, there's not going to be a win-win solution. I'm going to have to find a win-lose solution. It's written into us. It's our instinct, but it's not actually true. It's not the most mature way that we could conduct ourselves. We get fixated on our personal strategies, and especially when we're stressed, we would rather dig down and defend those strategies than consider other, more creative options. I say we'd rather, like we had a conscious choice, but this is almost entirely an unconscious process. If we make that unconscious process conscious, we have the option of doing something else. So let's face it, a lot of our conflict is the simple result of the zero-sum fallacy. Now, there are, of course, let's not oversimplify, there are plenty of conflicts which are not the result of the zero-sum fallacy, but if you look around the world, a lot of the long entrenched conflicts are people digging down into one position without the willingness to seek a creative solution that could allow both sides to thrive. It says, for you to have resources, I'll need to go without. Or for me to have choices, your freedoms must be limited. But ours is not an era of lack. The wealthiest people on planet Earth have plenty of money for the most ambitious climate change reversal strategies, like a small percentage of, if you look at some of those lists, right? Who's got all the world's resources? If you took a tiny percentage of those resources, you could fund all of the most radical climate change reversal strategies just tomorrow. And they would still be millionaires or billionaires. I just think that's what, like, we should tell them. I don't think they know. Like, wow, like there's such an opportunity. This is going to be really quite amazing. They'd still be rich afterwards. Super cool. We currently produce more than enough calories to feed everyone on Earth. The tribal land-based warfare that this zero-sum fallacy was born out of in our human ancestors, that no longer applies. that actually no longer applies. It's not factual anymore. The only reason to fight is because of greed, hate, or stubbornness. But even greed, hate, and stubbornness are always signifying unmet human needs. It's not for us to vilify or dehumanize the greedy, the haters, and the stubborn. They're desperately and suicidally expressing precious human needs that have gone unmet for so long that they can only ask for them to be met in tragically dysfunctional ways. Another quote made famous by Gandhi: "We have enough for everyone's need, but not enough for everyone's greed." The art of the win-win solution is to focus on these needs and find higher order strategy that can meet them all in a novel and creative way. If there was ever an era where we could end war, it is this one, with more technological advancement, information, and freedom than ever before. If we train our creativity, this is not a basic human capacity, this is a higher order human capacity. If we train our creativity, we'll tap into our human potential, which doesn't always satisfy our instinct towards zero-sum thinking, but it is our future if we are to have one at all. Okay, number one was abandon, divest, get rid of punitive and retributive force. Second one, watch out for the zero-sum fallacy. Your last code to becoming a peacemonger is engage in integral thinking. No, not the calculus. I just use this from this work, Spiral Dynamics, from Claire Graves and a later thinker, Ken Wilber. I don't like everything they say, but I do like this idea of integral thinking. Claire Graves proposed that as human cultures develop through people like warlord societies, and then the great mythic religions and city states, and then democratic societies eventually, and then whatever we're creating now, the post-democratic society, I hope it's one that transcends and includes democracy rather than it transcends and tries to exclude it, like some of the attempts we've seen on planet Earth. These levels of human development grow and grow and grow, but Graves proposed that there's a magical, wonderful thing that only at a certain level of human development can you look at all the other ones and understand what they're trying to do. Understand that they actually bring some value, that the warlord societies are actually, they're not complete by any means. It's a horrible way to live, but they're expressing an aspect of our human inheritance. The mythic membership societies are the same thing that built Greece and Egypt and all of these things. And these were also horrible societies. They gave us the Spanish Inquisition, for goodness sakes. But it's also the ability to band together like a UU fellowship, or band together like people with certain values. Graves proposes that only people at a level of development, human development, that he calls integral, can look at those different ways of being and have a conversation with them instead of just fighting as if our way of being was the only right one. Everybody loves to fight as if they had God's perfect take on the truth. And what history shows is that none of us ever do. It's not to say flatland. It's not to enter our previous president, our great fearless leaders post-truth world where every type of statement is exactly as true as every other statement, and we can just call fake news, and many people are saying many important things. It's not to say that, but it is to say, if we constantly battle for who's right, our aims to get people to come to the table, have a conversation, and listen will always be met with failure. Only this second tier thinking, this integral thinking, has the capacity to see the value in other vantage points and thus speak to them in their own language. Only here can we stop fighting and learn to work together. It may be that even if we win without coming from this perspective, we'll still be perpetuating the might is right fighting for control paradigm that feeds inevitable cycles of violence. The research here is young, but the proponents of integral theory feel that coming from the second tier or integral is actually psychoactive. This has been my experience. The more you're willing to understand and open to another's perspective with empathy, the more it acts on their psyche, and they seem to be more willing to return the favor. This is one of the most empowering pieces of knowledge I've ever come across, that we can deeply influence our society by changing our own behavior, just like the starry-eyed hippies always thought. We'll still have to deal with holdouts, those people whose trauma or deprivation from compassion, deprivation from education or resources makes it impossible for them to meet us halfway. For this, we have the previous principles. We have the protective use of force. But when possible, just by creating a new culture of moving beyond zero-sum thinking, moving into understanding more and more perspectives, we make a world where war will gradually become obsolete. My pitch to you today is not that you should be against war and you should fight it and you should smash down the warmongers with, well, okay. It's also not that we should just sit back and be passive. My pitch to you is, whatever we have to do in the meantime that meets our values, let's create together a world where war is obsolete. Like in the book of Micah, the vision that swords are beaten into plowshares and spears are turned into pruning hooks. That when you say, hey, we got to stop war, man, and somebody says, like, war, what's that? Never heard of it. Because the amount of human potential for creative solutions is so infinite and so well known that we start to act from our highest potential rather than from our basest instincts. It may be that tribalism, nationalism, and violence are hardwired into humanity, that we'll never outgrow them. I prefer, though, to see these as natural to us as they are to a toddler. We can grow out of the urge to hit, bite, and scream, and we can be happier for having outgrown it as mature adults.